right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Anything to report from the overnight break? All right, if not, then we will go ahead and resume with the direct examination of Sergeant Vance. And Ms. Whaley, if you're ready to proceed.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yesterday we had looked at a number of the photographs that were taken at the scene, including all of the markers that have been placed outside the apartment 4, indicating the presence of bullet casings, as well as the bullet in marker 37 over by the wall in the foyer, in the breezeway. When those were all collected and sent to the crime lab by crime scene unit, the crime scene unit take close-up photographs of the 10 casings that were later determined to have been fired by former Detective Hankison that we saw in the parking lot.
Yes, each individual item of evidence is typically taken back to the CSU lab, and then they take closer photos, or where they can put it on their lab tables, and they more of a physical examination with in the use of a photograph.
Permission to approach. I hand you the photographs that have been marked Commonwealth Exhibit 77 through 87, and then 89 through 93. If you would examine those photos.
Yes, ma'am.
And are those accurate, fair and accurate representations of the casings and bullets?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, move to admit exhibits 77 through 87.
No objection.
And 89 through 93.
No objection, Judge.
All right, they'll be so admitted.
So if you would, do you have the laser pointer up there?
I do.
Direct your attention to the screen and to exhibit 77. And this is a bullet labeled exhibit 21 by the crime scene unit. And as we saw yesterday, they have different numbers depending on the crime scene unit, the marker number. So is this a photograph of the bullet that we saw yesterday in exhibit 99 on the dining room table of apartment 3?
Yes.
Okay, exhibit 78. And again, this photograph was identified yesterday in photograph exhibit number 105 as being the bullet on the floor amongst the glass, the shattered glass in apartment 3 near the sliding glass door.
Yes.
And that's a close-up of that same bullet. Moving on to exhibit 79. Marked here as exhibit 23, and that we saw yesterday in the photograph of the parking lot with marker 1 next to it, one of the casings taken from the parking lot.
Yes.
Next to marker 1.
Yes.
Moving on to exhibit 80. this is now numbered Exhibit 25. As we saw yesterday, it was the casing marked by marker 3 in the parking lot. This is a close-up of that casing.
Yes.
Now Exhibit 81. The now labeled number 26, but it's the same casing as we saw in the parking lot next to marker 4.
Yes.
Exhibit 82. Is this now marked Exhibit 27, the same casing that we saw in the parking lot next to marker 5 in that area between the Roto-Rooter van and the truck in the parking lot?
Yes.
And Exhibit 83, now marked by the crime scene unit as number 28. This is the same casing that was in the photograph in the parking lot by marker 6.
Yes.
Exhibit 84, now marked number 29 by the crime scene unit, and is this the casing that was collected next to marker 7, also in the parking lot
Yes.
between the van and the truck? Exhibit 85, now been labeled number 30, and is this the same casing that was next to marker 8 in the parking lot?
Yes.
Exhibit 86, now labeled number 31, is this the same casing that was collected where marker 9 in the parking lot was that we saw yesterday?
Yes.
Now Exhibit 87, another casing and a close-up, now labeled number 32, and is this the same casing that we saw in the parking lot? Well, the previous one we just looked at, 86, I failed to mention that this is the one that was underneath the tire by marker 9.
Yes.
Underneath the tire of the roto van. Okay, now go on to 87, and now labeled 32, that was collected next to marker 10 in the parking lot.
Yes.
Now moving on to 88, not yet, 89. Okay. Now, this has been labeled number 69, and is this fragment of the bullet that we saw yesterday on the dining room floor in apartment 4 that was next to marker 40?
Yes.
Now, Exhibit 90. Does this photograph contain the bullet that we saw yesterday in a photograph next to marker 47 in the dresser drawer?
Yes.
Exhibit 91. Also a bullet close-up, and now labeled 82. Is this the bullet that we observed in the photo of the bathroom soap dish with the bullet in it
Yes.
yesterday?
Yes.
I think that photo was Exhibit 60 from yesterday, that photo. Next, 92, Exhibit 92, another bullet, which is now labeled 83. Is this the same bullet that we saw yesterday on top of the utility closet on top of the furnace in the utility closet that I believe was in the Exhibit 58 yesterday, the photograph of the utility closet.
Yes.
And now 93, another close-up of a casing that is now labeled by the crime scene unit number 87. Is this the 10th casing that you indicated there was a casing that did not have a marker by it that was located underneath the van?
Yes.
When the van was moved, is that when this casing was discovered?
Yes.
Okay. So that is a total of 10 casings collected from the parking lot.
Correct.
And all of those, a total of 10 casings and 6 bullets. The bullets being number 69 that was found, the fragment found on the dining room floor of apartment 4. Number 20, these are the lab number, or the crime scene unit numbers. The number's 21, which was taken from the dining room table of apartment 3. Number 22, which was on the floor in the living room of apartment 3. The number 47 marker, now lab number 79, taken from the top dresser drawer in the south bedroom, that being the 4th bullet. The 5th bullet being crime scene unit number 82, removed from the soap dish in the bathroom. That's the 5th bullet. And the 6th bullet being crime scene unit number 83, being the bullet taken from the top of the furnace in the utility closet.
Yes.
So that's 6 bullets that we just saw close-ups of and 10 casings. Now there were, at some point after the crime scene unit collected this evidence, there were 3 additional bullets collected by the FBI in an additional, more invasive search of apartment 4. Correct?
Yes.
Obviously, you weren't
Right,
involved
I was not
in
part of
that,
that, yes.
but there were 3 additional bullets collected. Now, these that you have just described in the close-up photographs were all submitted to Kentucky State Police Crime Lab to be analyzed and compared to the gun.
Yes, they were sent to the ballistics examiner for examination.
And we will hear from another witness that the defendant's service weapon that he was using that night was also, of course, collected
Of course.
and then submitted to the crime lab.
Yes.
Okay. Now, there was an additional bullet that you described from the breezeway from marker 37. I'm going to hand you what's marked Commonwealth Exhibit 88. Is that a close-up of the bullet collected in the breezeway by marker 37?
Yes.
And if you would look at the screen. Is that a close-up of the bullet collected over on the opposite wall from apartment 4 that's now designated as number 65?
Near marker 37.
by marker 37.
Correct.
Now, that bullet, as you stated yesterday, was also submitted for testing and was later determined to have been fired from the 9mm that we saw under the bed in the south bedroom of apartment 4.
Yes, ballistically, it was compared and found to match that of the gun, the 9mm the handgun that was found inside the apartment.
Okay. I move to admit Exhibit 88.
No objection.
All right, it'll be so admitted.
Now, did the crime scene unit and the staff, the officers of the public integrity unit, conduct a complete search of apartment 4?
Absolutely.
And would you expound upon that? What measures you took in processing that apartment?
So at the conclusion of the exterior scene processing, as like I said yesterday, that was the main focus initially because, you know, there are certain things we couldn't control in the exterior of those buildings, people coming and going and whatnot. So in the meantime, apartment 4, the door was not shut but pulled to where it would conceal Ms. Taylor's body. A 3rd Division officer, Officer Asia Clay, was positioned in the breezeway. And her job was to prevent any of the residents, if they did have to come out, they would have to make contact with her, and then she would make contact with me, and then we would kind of try to ascertain why they're coming out. This is during the overnight, so you know I think that only happened once, but she was there for a long time. So once we worked our way into the breezeway and started to collect evidence. We were there in the exterior, the common area. We worked our way into the apartment. Once we got into the apartment, the same process kind of worked. We took overalls. You know, we put markers down as far as what evidence was obvious. So there's a process to where, you know, anything that's this clear that stands out, we do markers, and then once the evidence that's obvious to you know, any person in there, that's collected. And I should kind of go back a little bit. So while we're in the exterior scene, we do what's called a 3D scan. We use Farrell scanners. Farrell is just a brand. So I spent 5 years in homicide as a homicide detective, and I can tell you, you know, typically scans, and there's variations in how many scans you do on scenes, but you wouldn't typically do more than 10. It just depends on the characteristics of the scene. But in this case, we did 25 independent scans, and the reason why is because each scan captured as much of the scene in a 3D environment. So we can go back in the scan, and using the proprietary software from Farrell, we can go in and we can measure in a three-dimensional application. We can measure things in free space and have a certain amount of accuracy. It's a very useful tool for investigators. So we did 25 individual scans, and that includes the interior processing. So I say that because it slows the scene processing down, because you are methodically documenting each item of evidence, and there's a duration of time in each part of that scene process. So once we make it into the interior of the apartment, that same procedure was done. So once we identify obvious evidence, we put markers down. That evidence is collected, and scans are done. In the duration after that is completed, we would methodically go through that apartment, and you can see this in some of the crime scene photos where, you know, we tried to develop and present or show with photographs trajectories of bullet defect in the kitchen, in the common wall between 4 and 3, in the wall that separates the living room and the south bedroom, that bedroom that's immediately south of the hallway where Ms. Taylor was located. Trying to reconstruct or have a photograph and or a scan that will show the trajectory of the projectiles that were shot. I should note that in this process, Faro had they have a proprietary trajectory program built into their scans, into their scan product. And unfortunately, that no one from LMPD had been trained on that, and we actually at a later date had to have Farrell come in and evaluate our scans and then interpret it for us. So
In that process, did you discover any guns other than the 9mm under the bed in the south bedroom?
no,
And you searched every inch of that apartment?
the legal authority that allowed the public integrity unit to search that apartment would have encompassed any projectiles, which a projectile can be anywhere. So the scope of our search was limitless. So what that meant is we could search anywhere in that apartment legally.
Did you find any evidence of narcotics?
No, and there was no narcotics listed on the property section of our legal authority. So the procedure on that would have been as we would have come in contact with narcotics, we would have written an additional legal authority to seize those narcotics.
And as we saw in the photographs yesterday, you did come across mail matter that was collected,
Yes,
that was addressed or had Jamarcus Glover's name.
yes.
And so you searched in closets, in corners, in drawers, and so forth.
Everywhere. Everywhere in apartment 4.
Now, the integrity of the crime scene was maintained throughout until you completed all the collection of evidence, the photographing, and so forth.
So a part of the investigation is that, investigators go back and review wearable video in relation to officers that responded to the scene. So that's why I'm able to say confidently that the integrity of the interior of apartment 4 was maintained throughout until it was released sometime in the afternoon that same day.
Did, in the course of also completing the investigation, did you obtain a photograph of the clothing that had been worn by Mattingly that indicated where the bullet entered?
Yes.
Clothing.
Yes, the investigators in our unit obtained that through a forensic examination.
I'm now going to hand you Commonwealth's Exhibit 120 and 121 and ask you to explain what is depicted in those two photographs.
Exhibit 120 is Sergeant Mattingly's pants that he was wearing that night of the incident, and it shows projectile defect in the pant with a scale for size purposes, and there's obvious what appears to be blood evidence on the pants.
So that would be the left leg then,
It was the left front pocket.
front pocket of the pants.
Correct.
And now Exhibit 121.
This is a picture of, or photograph of Sergeant Mattingly carried his wallet in his front left pocket, or his front pockets typically, from what I've been told. In this case, it was in his front left pocket, and it should be noted that there was a metal ring affixed in that wallet, which was very important that night.
Right. So the bullet entered the wallet.
The bullet hit the wallet, and when it entered the wallet, as you can see in the photograph, this ring here actually deflected or changed the trajectory of that projectile.
And it passed through the wallet
It did.
because it passed completely through his leg and ended up in the breezeway.
It exited the back of his left leg and ended up in the breezeway next to apartment 1.
So this is another indication of where it hit
Correct.
the bullet. Okay. Move to admit exhibits 120, 121.
No objection.
They'll be so admitted.
In further conducting your investigation, did you interview at the Public Integrity Office all of the detectives who had been there that evening, that night, serving the search warrant?
So initially, the involved officers, the officers that were directly involved in the shooting, were not interviewed. We Public Integrity Unit goes by what's considered the force science model, and we allow officers. Well, let me back up. Officers aren't required to speak with PIU investigators. They have the same constitutional rights that all of us have. And because we conduct criminal investigations, they cannot be compelled by their employment to speak with us. So the involved officers would not be interviewed regardless of whether they would consent to it or not that night, because we adopted the force science model. We found that when there's time between the critical incident and when, at least 2 sleep cycles, that the officers are able to articulate and be more concise and provide more information in relation to the shooting or the critical incident. So it's beneficial for everyone involved. But we did, however, conduct interviews with what we would consider as, or categorize as, witness officers that were there as well that night.
Okay. Back to the processing of the scene. Did you discover that there had been a bullet that exited out of the ceiling of apartment 4?
Yes. So
explain that.
So during the investigation, I can't say confident, or I can't say definitely, but it's likely that the 2 projectiles that entered the ceiling of apartment 4 that traveled into apartment 8, which is immediately above apartment 4, were likely from Sergeant Mattingly, because during this incident, when he was shot, he, in his own account, fell down on his buttocks from being shot. He was immediately injured, and he was critically injured, and he returned fire in defense of his own life. And it's likely that those 2 rounds that entered apartment 8 were from him because of the way he described the incident. And I was later told that at least one of those projectiles exited the roof of the building after the roof was examined by the FBI.
So there were no bullets retrieved that exited the ceiling of 4 into 8 and out the ceiling of 8?
No. PIU investigators were able to obtain consent from apartment 8, the occupant in apartment 8, and we went in and we photographed the defect, if you will, related to those 2 projectiles.
Was an interview conducted by Public Integrity Unit of the defendant, Brett Hankison?
Yes, there was.
And when did that interview occur?
March 25th of 2020.
What is his history with Louisville Metro Police? How many years had he been with the department?
I believe it's the time that this incident occurred, he had a little more than 17 years on.
And at the time, in March of 2020, what unit was he in?
He was, well, the narcotics unit had been rebranded several times. According to this document that I have from his personnel record, it looks like he was transferred to narcotics, which is now called CID. It was called CID when this incident occurred, but it was originally called narcotics. But he was transferred on June the 12th of 2016.
And he was a K-9 officer?
Yes,
At that time.
at the time of the shooting, yes.
Previous to that, had he been in what's called a flex unit?
Yes, he was a flex detective. At the time, the LMPD had flex units within each patrol division that would handle anything that the division commander had to address. Like, could be car break-ins, could be street-level narcotics. They did everything, but it was primarily narcotics through each division.
And in that unit, there would be a lot of search warrants executed?
I would imagine so, yes.
Now, at the time of the interview that you said was March 25th, did he sign an agreement to be interviewed?
He did.
And he was advised of his rights?
He was, and an attorney was present.
He agreed to be interviewed?
He did agree.
And have you reviewed that, and it was done by video,
Yeah, video and audio.
and have you reviewed that video of the interview?
I have.
And is it a fair and accurate representation of the interview that occurred
Yes.
at PIU on March 25th?
Yes.
At this time, we would move to play the video interview.
No objection.
All right.
And is it possible to lower the lighting? This interview will be on Exhibit